Hi everyone, here's a video to just run you through the fundamental laws behind the templates that you build and use in Nacsport. This applies throughout the whole suite of software, but as I move on in this demonstration, there's some tools like panel flows and cluster buttons and graph descriptors which aren't available in everything, but I'll start from the bottom and build up. Firstly, I'm just going to make this video smaller because I don't really need you to look at that here. So the descriptor law, this determines everything that happens in your template. So a descriptor goes into any active category and the last pressed category. So an active category is a manual mode category button which is on. So this button is on, which means whenever I press a descriptor, that is going into this category. And you can see down here in the play-by-play table, this is adding up. If you don't have your play-by-play table turned on, press this button. And I recommend that you always use your play-by-play table. As long as this symbol has no red cross through it, this will always open up every time. So there's a manual mode category that was on and our descriptors went into it. The other place a descriptor will go is the last pressed category. So categories which have a preset time, so like a pre and a post time, this one has 5 and 5. If I press this, this is now the last pressed category. So I can click that descriptor, and any descriptor clicks I now do are going to go into that category until I click another one. So if I now click this category, that has become the last pressed one, and that will receive the category clicks. Also, if I now press this one, this is an active category, but it's also the last pressed, so the descriptors are only going here. Something to bear in mind is that even though this button might have a 5-second pre and post time, so if I let that play out past the post time of it, even though that clip is technically finished, I can still add descriptors within it because it was the last pressed one. So descriptor 1 and 2 are still going into that last one. And if you look down here in your register control, you have an options button. And there's a couple of descriptor options for you here. This one is on by default, let the same descriptor be used several times in a category. And you've got last descriptor sets the end time for the category. So if that was turned on, my clip length would have extended to the point that I pressed this descriptor. So now when it's 2 minutes 10, if I clicked descriptor 2, that clip, rather than being a 5 seconds post time, it would actually extend to that moment if I had that option turned on. So something else we can do is we can have automatically added descriptors. So if I right click a descriptor, I can see activate auto add descriptor. Now without having to click that, it's going to go on into every category button I press, whether that's a manual mode button or a preset time button. And I can right click to turn that off and right click to turn on another one. So really useful for halves and other data like that. The thing to bear in mind is that a descriptor goes into an active category and the last pressed. So if you have an active category on, and now I also press this preset time, that descriptor is going to go into two places. So if I press descriptor 1, you see it's gone into our active category and also our last pressed category. If I now press another category, this active one is still on. So if I press descriptor 2, that's still gone into my active category and it's also going into my last pressed one. A lot of people sometimes get confused with these counters. The counters aren't really for you to really analyze and see all the data that's happening within your analysis. That's where we have the tools like the matrix and the dashboard to really show you clearly. And some people get confused with these counters, especially if they've got manual mode buttons on. Because what this counter is telling you is how often the descriptor has appeared within your database here. So if I press this button on again and click this descriptor once, it goes up by 1. If I have this manual mode category on and I press this one, remember that this descriptor is going to go into 2 places, so that number has gone up by 2 because we added descriptor 2 into the active category and the last pressed category. So that fundamental was really important to remember because it applies to all the next scenarios that we go to. So let's move on. And what we're going to look at here are clusters. So currently clusters are available from Pro Plus, Further in the video, we're going to look at graphic descriptors, which are available from Scout Plus, so there is still things to learn for a Scout Plus level onwards. What clusters will do is help save clicks. So rather than having, for example here, if I wanted to click top category, then top descriptor, middle category, middle descriptor, bottom category, bottom descriptor, I could save myself lots of clicks here by putting them in a cluster. And you'll see that the order I've got is top category, top descriptor, middle category, middle descriptor, bottom category, bottom descriptor. So if I layered these buttons together in a cluster, that cluster always works from top to bottom. Now the way that you determine what top and bottom is, on each button you have a setting down here about the vertical order. And these can be positive numbers or negative numbers. As long as they're one digit apart, then that's fine. So I've used a mix of negative numbers here and mostly positive. Okay, so this has the lowest value, this has the highest value. And what we're going to do is I'm now going to cluster these together. So I could drag and drop to reposition these, but a useful tool down here with position and size of your buttons, this is where you can make sure that everything is always the same width and the height, but I can reposition things here as well. So you'll see this has a Y position of 150, 210. So if I want all of these to be in the same place, I can select these buttons, double click this number, type in 30, and I've clustered that up here. Okay, so let's look at how this registers now. With one click, I've got the same again, top category, top descriptor, bottom category, bottom descriptor, middle category, middle descriptor. It's the same information I had before. So if we look here, I can go a category followed by two descriptors, a category by a descriptor, then a category. And again, we can see that in our play-by-play. So let's quickly change these, because again, I've got vertical orders on these from lowest to highest. So let's set all of these to be the same Y position of 30. So they're now clustered up. And you'll see that if I click here, we go in top category with top descriptor, middle descriptor, like we had here. Then we had middle category with the bottom descriptor, then the bottom category. So there you're just clearly seeing that we're definitely going from top to bottom. Let's move on. And when we start mixing in manual mode categories, this is where we need to think back to the descriptor law that we had. The descriptor goes into the last pressed category and also any active category. So if we looked here at this chain, that category followed by this descriptor is because it's gone into the last pressed one. An active category here, so this is going to receive this descriptor. This is now my last pressed category, and this descriptor is going to go into that one and my active category. So you see bottom descriptor has gone into two areas. Rather than having to click this button, if you press escape on your keyboard, it will turn off any active manual mode buttons you have. So if you had 3 or 4 on at the same time, if you press escape, it's going to turn them off. And obviously that's going to be useful when I cluster these up now, because we're not going to see that button that's on down there. So let's just cluster these up together. Change that to 30. So again, if I click here, we've got all the same data as before, because we had that category button that was in the middle that's coming through. Even though I can't see it here because of the way that I've set that cluster up, that middle category manual button is still on. So if I click to descriptor over here, that's still going to go in. And the bottom category that was at the very bottom of my cluster was the last pressed category. So it's still going there as well. So final example here with the clustering. We've got top category manual mode. Because that's at the top, it's always information we've got. So let's join them up. Let's press example end so you can see a clear break in our play-by-play table. Okay, so we have all the descriptors that are in the top category manual mode. I can still see that's on, and I had descriptors which were beneath the middle category button, so they've gone in there. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some really clear examples of where the clusters are going to go. It's always from top to bottom, and you arrange those buttons by using your vertical order settings. So I can see if we dragged this all out again, these are the vertical orders that we had set for those buttons. Okay, so let's just drag this up here. Okay, let's just select these. So vertical order, that's the important thing for each button with this box here. And we go top to bottom as you've got things. So there's a really useful thing you can do as well, and all I've done here to make things easier for you, which I think is a useful tool as well, rather than putting everything clustered on top of each other, all of these buttons have the same top point, but I've just lowered them down. So if you see the blue highlight that's going around, this is still the bottom because it's -3, -1, 0, 1, 3, and let's change this one to 5 to be at the top. But I've laid them up in this way so you can see which ones are on at each time. Now this button is at the very top. It's got a vertical order of 10. This is at the bottom, vertical order of -10. The same with these ones here. But you can start getting creative with your clusters and overlaying buttons in lots of different ways, because the cluster is all about where you click. So for example, if I clicked here, it's going to press this button and this one and all the ones behind it. Remember that I've laid these all up, so essentially I'm clicking everything underneath. A useful thing you can do though is you can make a button completely transparent. So if you just drag this slider all the way over to the right, don't use this visible button whilst registering, it's better to just fully put the slider across, and that cluster will still work. So even though you're not fully seeing that button, and again if I make it the transparency, if I fully pull that over, I maybe don't want that covering my button, so I'm going to fully pull it over to the right, and then it's basically invisible, but it's still going to work. So if I did the cluster click here on the top left category, you see we fired off lots of stuff here. So I had the top left category, the next thing in my cluster was top category manual, and then everything underneath that was a lower layer. So we've got all these descriptors that have gone in. We had this category halfway through the chain, and then a bottom descriptor, and then our final bottom category here, which then took in the final bottom left descriptor that's there as well. But if I did the same now using this transparent button, I get the same again, and there's a really nice visual here that I don't need the button to be visible, but I can still see these lines show me that the manual mode button is on. Okay, so something that you have in the elite version of Nacsport is the ability to use activation links. So when you're editing a template, if you want to run activation links between buttons, if you hold down the space bar, you're then able to link buttons to each other, and you just drag and drop from one button to another to turn a link. So if I wanted to link these buttons, I've held spacebar, dragged and dropped. When I go to this button here and the links menu, I can see what type of link it is and what behavior I want to set for that descriptor. So basically, where's this descriptor going to go? Is it going to go to the next button? So this is where you can kind of override the descriptor law. Is it going to go to the last category that was pressed, or is it going to go to both of those? There are dedicated tutorials on activation links. But what I want to show you here is how activation links and clusters work. And the important law here is that an activation link will always happen before a cluster. So behind this button, I have actually got another button called top descriptor. So I'll just leave that there so you can see it's there. But remember that we always do activation first, followed by the cluster beneath it. So this button has got an activation link to go and turn on middle category R. So what we need to do now is look at what this button is doing. And this one is also doing another activation link up to this top one. And this top one is doing 3 activation links. And the important thing here is the order that I've added them. So the order they appear, the top of the list is going to happen first, and the bottom is going to happen last. So this button is going to go and turn on this one, and also this one, and finally this one here. But still remember, all of these things have happened before I then move back in the cluster. So even though this is a cluster button, if there's any activation links and then subsequent activation links after that, they are going to run before the cluster happens. So if we see that in action now, if I click top category, and we really need to pay attention to our play-by-play here. So top category went and turned on middle category R, which we've got here, which went and turned on top category manual R. And now this one went and turned on our, let me remember, middle category R, which is here. It turned on bottom category and bottom category R, and also last press category. So if you think about it, this is actually the last press category because it was the final one in the link, and this is an active manual mode button. So those two were within that link my last press categories, which means that when we moved on to the next cluster level behind, which was our descriptor called top descriptor, that obviously got added to our manual mode button because descriptors go into any active category, and it got added to our last press category. And to just show that again, if I now manually click a descriptor that's outside of a cluster, final descriptor, that has gone into this one here because it was the last press category, and because we've got a manual mode button here as well. So again, we had top category, which was going to here, which went to here. So now this is a manual mode button that's on and went and fired off all these. The last one in the chain was last press category. So after that, this is my last press category. This is an active category button, and then we went onto our cluster and we added the top descriptor into there. So it could sound complicated, but all these laws are designed for you to really determine where you want your descriptors to go, and you have to apply the overriding descriptor law that a descriptor goes into any active category and the last pressed one, and then think about with your clusters that activation links will always go before the next level in the cluster. Okay, so here we are now seeing the graphic descriptor, and when you've got a graphic descriptor, you need to think of this actually like a normal descriptor button. And there's two parts of information that we get from a graphic descriptor. We get the XY data of the actual click point, but on our images, we can also create these zones. Again, there's tutorial videos on this, but we use a zone tool, lay out an area and call it a name. What you can also do with Nacsport version 6 is you can layer up multiple layers. So I've got left pitch and right pitch. I've also added top and bottom beneath that work in the same ways like clusters. So you can have multiple zones here. Again, left and right, I could go top third, middle third, bottom third, and it's going to act like a cluster that we've got there. So there's two bits of descriptor information that is going to come from that click point. So the XY data and the zone. So for now, let's just press one category here. Okay, so we've got bottom category. Sorry, let me just play this video so we definitely see this as the last press thing here. So if I click at this point now, I've created three descriptors, left pitch and bottom pitch, because they were my zones and using the cluster, and then the XY data that we've got here as well. With this filter option in your play-by-play, you can choose whether to show the XY data or not. So when it comes to where the data goes with your graphic descriptors, it's the same law that applies for descriptors. So it's going to go into any active category or the last pressed one. So in this cluster that we've got here, I have two manual mode buttons, top left category, top category manual, and my last pressed category, because it's at the bottom of the cluster, is bottom category. Okay. So now if I click here, that XY data and that pitch graphic areas of right pitch and top are going to go into those three category buttons because they're active and the last pressed one. So we've looked at are descriptor laws there and also cluster zones on graphic descriptors, but a lot of people want to use graphic descriptors and be really specific with the click color points and the click color shapes. So the amount of click color shapes that you can use depends on your versions, but you can set up different colors. So what do we mean by that? If we come here and edit this template, and this hopefully will become more evident as we work through here what I'm trying to show. By default, when you have a button that's created, it has this enable tick turned on by default. And if you make a new button, so if I do a double click here, it's normally black and then the circle shape. Okay, so this down here, we're defining the color of our click point for the graph descriptor and the shape of that click point as well. Now this enable is a major thing in determining what your click color points are going to do. So the easiest way to see it to begin with is if we just use categories on their own. If I have enable ticked, it means that whenever I press this button and I make click points, it's going to be this blue circle. If I do this one, it's going to be this pink sum symbol. And then when we come to a button which is not enabled, I'll teach you the rule that happens there. Then we'll move on to looking at descriptors and some key differences to bear in mind as well. So let's come through here, and if I click this manual mode button, so we know it's enabled blue circle. If I do 2 click points here, they are a blue circle. If I come down here to the pink sum and 2 click points, they are pink sums. Now when I use this category which has not enabled turned on, what it's going to do is take the click point shape and color settings from the last pressed button. So if I now do here and 2 clicks, we can see that I've got a pink sum because that was the last pressed button that was used. So if I came up here and did this manual category with blue circles, now I came down to this not enabled button here and did 2 click points, they're going to be the blue circle because it's the same shape and color as the last pressed button before it. Now what we can also do is use descriptors, and a lot of people use these for defining how their actions work. So let's say we had shot, and whether it was on target or off target, we might have a descriptor that says on target and we're going to mark it as green, off target and we're going to mark it as red. Okay, an easy example there. So again, let's come into our template settings here. If I look at this button, I can already see that it's a yellow X. If I come down to this button, this is a default one that has the black color and the circle. A quick tip here is that if you want your click point color to be the same color as your button, we can see this is red. When you're in Nacsport version 6, if you right click this box here, it changes that color to be exactly the same as this one here. Okay, so we've got a red circle that's happening there. So there's a couple of things to bear in mind now, is that a descriptor will most often override your category settings if it's got enabled, but there's a couple of things to bear in mind. So let's look here firstly. If I had just this button on its own, we know that normally it's just going to be a blue circle. But if now, before I click, if I press descriptor yellow X and I do a couple of clicks, they're 2 yellow X's. Whilst this is still on, if I now pressed red circle, this is my last press button here, now I've got 2 red circles. So this category has a mix of click points and colors. In the registering environment, an easy way to check this, because I've got my filter of show XY that's on here. If I double click, I can look into this specific clip here and see the points that I added onto this. Okay, and I can see there's the red points and the yellow points there. So again, if we did this with this pink button, if I went a single click here, then yellow X and then red circle, and we turn it off. If we double click and come back in, I see I've got the pink sum, the yellow X and the red circle. What happens if I had both of these buttons on? Because the descriptor, the shape and the color setting only applies to the last pressed category if that category is in enabled mode. So here, this is in enabled mode and this is in enabled mode, but this becomes my last pressed. So if I now did yellow X, 2 click points, there it looks to me like I've got 2 yellow X's. If I come in and check this last pressed one on manual category 2, I can see that it's 2 yellow X's. But if I come back to the first one, they're 2 blue circles. Okay, because that button has enabled turned on and blue circle, it's going to take those default settings, because after I turned this one on, I went and turned on another category button. But because I then pressed the descriptor, this descriptor's yellow X overrided the enabled option for the last press category. And the one pressed before that uses its own settings. If, however, we've got a button which is not enabled, then it will always use the descriptor click point settings. So if we go these 2 buttons on, and now I do the not enabled, remember that this is the last pressed. Okay, so this is definitely going to have the yellow X clicks. If I come and look at the pink sum and the blue circle one, double click, they are going to be a pink sum and they are going to be a blue circle. That's because this button, without having not enabled, it takes either the color settings of the last press category or the color settings of the last press descriptor that you used. So an easy way to look at this is if you really wanted to do something like on target, off target, a type of point, a type of outcome, is if you set your category buttons to be not enabled so that they are unticked, now the descriptor is always going to override. Okay, so if I went here and turned all 3 of these on, and I did a yellow X, 2 click points here, and then even if I did a red circle click points as well, like that, and now because I've got 3 manual mode buttons on, rather than clicking them to turn them off, I can always use the shortcut of the escape key to turn them off. If I double click here in my play by play, we can see we've got 2 yellow X's and 2 red circles on each of these category clips. Now remember, the difference there is that all of these are not enabled. These 2 are enabled and this one isn't. So even if we came here and said, actually let's enable this click point color, because it's the last press one, it's going to take the descriptor anyway for now. Okay, so 2 yellow X's, that one's going to stay as a yellow X. Sorry, let's just set that example again. Let's go these 3 on, yellow X, and we're going to click here. This one's going to be the yellow X because it was the last press one, so it takes settings of the descriptors. The others are going to be their default. But now if we went, all 3 of these are on, and remember they now have the enabled setting, and then I pressed here another category, that's now the last press one. We press this yellow X, turn these all off. This one's going to be a yellow X, but the rest of them are going to have their default settings. So here's a black circle, here's a pink sum, here's a blue circle. So there's a few things to get your head around there, and it will make more sense the more often you come back and watch this. But the thing to remember is that if you want to be really specific with your click point colors based on descriptors, then turn off the enabled mode setting for your categories, because then by default it's going to look at the settings of the last press descriptor to set the points. If you always want your categories to be a specific color, then use the enable option. The times when they're not going to show is if you've pressed the descriptor afterwards. However, in those scenarios, what you can do, so let's go and put in a blue circle here, and I'm going to press yellow X, and I'm going to press red circle, and I'm going to do a third click here. You do have the option to manually edit these as well. So we already saw that I could double click on a register and I see the click points for it. And if I have show play by play up here, you can right click on each graphic, on each XY plot, and it's going to show you the color settings that it's got. So this XY plot, and you can see the red circle around it, we're saying it's taking the shape and color settings from Descriptor yellow X. And we could go to this one and we know it's coming from Descriptor red circle. All the things that you see here are descriptors which have appeared inside this register and the actual category for that register. So I could change the settings for this to say, rather than taking the shape and color settings of Descriptor red circle, if I change here now, it's going to take the settings of the button, which is that blue circle. Okay, so double click to do your checks. remember the laws that we've talked through there, but you can manually edit with a right click afterwards as well. Okay, what you can also do to go a little bit further with your descriptors is actually physically block them from going into categories. So this is only something in the elite version. If you're editing your template, when you click on a category, if you go to behavior and go blocked descriptors, you'll see all the descriptors that you have available. And here's an example where I've blocked quite a few descriptors on this one and left a few available. So you can block specific descriptors, which can include the zones on your graphic descriptor, for example. And you can also block XY values here. There is an even easier way with blocking XY values. If you right click the button, you can turn block XY on and off. So if I was registering now and I have these clips going and I clicked pink circle, click here, and I was doing these points here, you can see a couple of things happening. Top category manual, I'd blocked the pitch zones, so I'm receiving the XY data but not the descriptor name of the pitch zones. And on linked category with XY block, I've not blocked the descriptor zones, but I have blocked the XY data from going into there. And all that we had here was, this is a new button that was an activation link from bottom category. Okay, so just to show that again, yellow X click here. This button had the descriptor zone names blocked, so I'm just receiving the XY data. This button I actually blocked the physical XY data. There is a useful trick if you were wanting to come back in, let's say post event, and add some more data to a button that had previously been blocked. If I now right click and turn this off, let's go and select this button again here, and I might use my right click option to delete all the descriptors we've got on that register. That's a quick tool that you can use. So I select this one here, and now if I go and add some click points, because I've no longer blocked the XY values, I can also get those in here. But if I was doing part of a live process where I don't want the XY values going in, because actually they might be coming from information that I've got linked to these other buttons, when I'm going and clicking here, I'm no longer getting those XY values. So there are lots of tools to block your descriptors, and you can block XY values as well. A final one here, a nifty tool that's been available for a while, is about preloading descriptors. So if you hold down the insert key on your keyboard and I click these buttons here, the descriptor icon has changed green, and the next category that I press, those descriptors are going to go into it. Okay, so I hold the insert key, preload these ones, then I press a button and they've gone into that category for me. So quite a few things to take in there, but hopefully it gives you a really deep understanding of what is possible in a template and the key laws to understand that apply the whole way throughout. Thanks for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed.